So now we move on to the stage of analysis of data and evidence that you've secured through the Social Sciences Citation Index. There are many ways in which you can do this, but for the scale of a project where you have to do an evidence-based review on articles, reviews, evidence found in the Social Sciences Citation Index, the four stages that I'm going to recommend are reduction, representing this then through Prisma, which is just as important, then degree relevance, and finally the categorization of your data. So this is, first of all, reduction, I suppose, is probably the stage where you focus on removing duplicate or irrelevant articles. Now you might be thinking, well, if I've already removed irrelevant articles, and there shouldn't be duplicates in there because I've done this search correctly, but sometimes these things can leak in, particularly if you've used more than one database source. But for this project, or the projects that I've described here, you should just be using the Social Sciences Citation Index, and that's the assumption anyway. But it's best represented. I mean, when you're removing articles, it's not enough to say we removed some and we were left with this final amount at the end. You've got to kind of prove it and represent it. You can do this via Prisma chart. Now, Prisma chart, what stands for the preferred reporting of items in systematic review and meta-analysis. But essentially, what it is a way of representing just the number of articles that you took out at a certain stage, at each stage in a graphical way, so you don't have to write up an awful lot saying, we removed the first article because it was a duplicate, we removed the second one because it was it wasn't relevant, or it wasn't a piece of research relevant to the topic despite the fact that we thought it was, and then we removed the third one because it was a duplicate. It's kind of a crisper way of doing it, and it provides an outline of the reasons for why items were removed and how many of them were removed. And the reasons, as I say, were for duplication. It can happen that sometimes articles are indexed twice in the same same way. It doesn't happen a lot, but it can happen. Or non-relevance to the criteria. And you probably think, well, look, after me putting so much work into doing my search, getting the search strings right, searching them under the correct category, after isolating them to on conditions of whether they were articles or reviews, perhaps everything should be relevant here. But as you pick through, you'll see that sometimes in all research databases, not just the Social Sciences Citation Index, that you will find ones that are opinion pieces or editorials or are somehow non-research based. They don't discuss empirical evidence. They don't discuss research that was conducted. Or they're not a review of other articles. That these somehow can they can leak in from time to time, or they're commentaries on those work. But that's not really what you're looking for here. There can be other factors, and they each data set has its own idiosyncrasies. But you'll find these as these arise. But the idea is to systematically remove articles and reviews that don't match your research criteria. Now, for an example of this, again, there's my own article, Journal of Nursing Management. I promise you, I'm not. Say it again. I'm not on a commission to get this, and I don't get any type of additional brownie points for people having viewed it or reviewed it or anything like that. But it's just it's there because the editors worked really hard with me to make sure that I followed the criteria for a systematic review of evidence-based research literature in this. So I think it's a good example for how it might possibly be done. So to look at that, then again, that's the article on page 294. Sorry, page 294. If you go to that part of the article, you'll see at the top of it, there's a Prisma chart. Have a look at that now. The Prisma chart, if we scan down to it, we're on page 291 there. So to work down to it here a little bit, sorry, is there. Okay. And you'll see at the start there, now you'll know from this review, it's slightly different to other ones. I did two separate searches, one that just looked at spiritual and management, and then other ones that looked at religion and management, because the title was Spirituality and Religion and Management. And then just make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on here. At the very top, you've got over 2,800 records that were possibly there for review, and in case that seems daunting, we got it down to 47 in the very end. Sorry, there's 47 articles at the very end there. But what do we do at each stage? So there's 2 separate searches. You usually just have one, or sometimes, you know, if you're doing another search, you might have one that's from another source that's brought in there. So we got rid of 263 of these turned out to be not research-based peer-reviewed articles. They were commentaries or opinion pieces that had made their way into the literature there. So we removed those because we didn't want them there. Then, because I was looking at nursing, I was able to it was possible but to just look at articles that were included in the nursing subcategory and not in other areas as well. So it was possible to remove 2,315 articles at that stage. Then I mentioned earlier that it's possible to remove articles on the basis of something that's particular to the area, the sector that you're looking at. For me, in this case, it was that we've got the search terms nursing, management, religion, spirituality, or spiritual, the variations of them there. That when you mention management in the nursing literature, it can mean a clinical process such as pain management or patient care management, or there are lots of different clinical management, lots of different variations of those. So it was possible to remove those ones that didn't discuss management as from the context of the nurse manager, what the nurse manager needs to know, or the managing nurse needs to know. And then finally, at the end, once I got this down to, with all those removed, there were 50 articles at the end. See, I'm mentioning specific numbers, the ones that were taken out, so this should add up correctly. There were 50 articles at the very end which were right, but 3 of these were duplicates. So we removed then and got that down to 47 articles that were selected for analysis at the end. So that's pretty much a Prisma chart. That's if you work that through and you explain each step of the way and can justify why you've removed those articles at each step of the way, then that'll work. And I've titled it there Prisma flow diagram of selection of articles for analysis, figure 1. You might want to consider doing something like that for your own review. On to the next stage, which is to look at the degrees of relevance. So when you look at that Prisma analysis, directly underneath it, the text will go into how I further divided up that literature. And what I did was I noticed that, when you're looking at any topic and it's got, whatever it is in the title, whistleblowing, religious discrimination in the workplace, if you've done a topic search, it might bring up different variations of that. Yeah, the dark triad of leadership aspects and elements. When you're looking through that, then you can look at, level 1. But you can determine that some are more specific to the topic than others. So I put in place kind of a hierarchy, and this, I did after kind of reading about 10, 20 articles as well, realizing that there were different degrees of relevance. So you can kind of go back at an early stage and put this category or this level of ranking, if you like, in place. And what I felt worked for me was that there were the articles where spirituality and or religion, they were absolutely central to the work. They're what the work was about, and they were key to it. And then there were ones that, spirituality or religion were as important to the work as another aspect, and the other aspect was nurse management. So they were ones that they were kind of key or important to. Then you had ones where spirituality and religion, they were talked about, but they weren't central, but they were given a respectful amount of coverage. And then you had ones where they were considered as a variable alongside a lot of other ones. They weren't critical to it, but they were just one output that was discussed amongst others. This is useful when you get to the discussion stage of your well, first of all, it's good to mention it in your analytical stage, because I was able to say that, I think it was 47% or nearly half of the articles did see it as central. And when you're getting to the discussion stage, you might need to just look at your level 1 or your level 2 articles only, because they're the ones who make the key contribution to the area that you're studying. The final bit of this is, when you've got it down to that small group of articles, you look at the ones that you've isolated for review, and then you identify key trends or key areas that you can use to divide up the work that you're looking at. Often students will say, okay, I decided to look at some articles that were, about gender, or some that were about culture, or some that were about, religion or nationality, or whatever. But rather than imposing an outside lens on this. You've got to look at what the articles themselves say. So, you know, that could be a possible research question if there's nothing that looks at gender or culture or nationality, or whatever, or you know, or orientation, or membership of a minority group, or whatever it else is that you want to look at. You can suggest that as a possible research question if no other work has been done on it, to see whether there's something of relevance. But if you're categorizing them, you can use it to divide up the body of the work that you have. Like, look what's there, and often these are just suggested from the reading that you undergo itself. For example, an article I wrote with Sharon Turnbull back in, it was published in 2005, so it's 15 years old now. We were looking at the management development literature and just reviews of the management development literature, research that had been done on it. And we noticed that there was two main approaches that were there. There was the EMIC approach, or ones that looked at, they were articles that were written primarily from the perspective of the provider of the management development, you know, the business school, the management development institute, the individual trainer. And those on the ethics side that looked at the experience of the individual manager who was, you know, undergoing these programs and trying to develop in line with their with the culture of the organization in which they found themselves. And perhaps not surprisingly, less literature was done on the ethic part than on the EMIC part. And that's where I think the interesting stuff happened. And that's what we were able to say as a potential research question at the end of it. And I use this as part of another scheme or a framework that we published more recently, just this year in fact, which is one on an overview of the responsible management learning literature. And from that, and I think I mentioned this in another lecture, I did mention it in another lecture, we were able to develop a 4 categories that we found within the literature. You've got the individual, so you got the provider here at the top, the EMIC one, and the ETIC one, the learning one at the top as well. But we're also able to look at, the level to which individuals were considered in the literature, or which organizations were considered. And when you put those two together, there was an interesting framework, I think, and a way of organizing a messy literature to say, okay, here's another potential way of looking at it. This one is about the individual as a responsible management learner. This one is about the teacher as a responsible management educator. This one is about the business school or the university as somebody who provides responsible thinking in relation to management learning. And this one over here is the one for how, the final one on the bottom right, responsible organizational learning, is an understudied but really important field. It's how do organizations change in ways that are responsible. You don't have to do it that way. You can make 1 or 2 divisions, whatever naturally comes out of the literature. It would be, if something isn't suggesting itself, you don't impose your own perspective or your viewpoint on it, but it's interesting if you can detect a trend in there to help make it easier for future researchers to use your work. Think of it this way. Somebody has to come along in the future and maybe deal with try to struggle through what it is that you're trying to struggle through and determine it. And they'll be able to say, well, look, I'm going to primarily focus on this. Somebody else has done this work and they have said that there's 4 different categories. I can locate what it is I'm going to study in one of these fields and develop that field from there. And that's a contribution that you'd make as a result of that. So the final part is about kind of really just wrapping it all up, and how do you bring all those different strands that we've already discussed together.